Hey, yo, I don't know no Barksdale. B, I don't know no Barksdale. Sorry, I've been rewatching a lot of The Wire recently, and I love that show. Also, Idris Elba, the man. I mean, the Baltimore accents are amazing. I love Idris Elba. I mean, everyone loves Idris Elba, but I almost wish he had a bigger career. What's up, guys? We're back with our Seeing Through Gebser series. We're on page, in this edition of the book, we are on page 454, and we are moving on to a new section. We are moving on to the arts, the manifestations of the aperspectival world. We already obviously started with the natural sciences, physics, biology. Then we went into the science of the mind, psychology, philosophy, and then social sciences, sociology, history, economics. Now we are moving on to the arts. We are working our way through. Boys and girls, we are 90 pages from being done. So we are getting to the bottom, and I think it's not that we're going to turn off our thinking brains or anything like that, but it is a little easier than getting, the quantum of action and all this stuff. But it's pretty cool, and he dedicates a large amount of time to the arts. He dedicates a shocking amount of time to the English language, and I think it's actually pretty cool and exciting. But I say, with all that out of the way, let's get right into it, right? Okay, so of course we're starting with music today. Quoting Gebser, the essence of each and every art is, in the main, the expression of the pre-rational and irrational, while the mind has the role of an ordering power. So all art is, in essence, an expression of the pre-rational and irrational. I think this is almost self-evident. No one is creating... I just watched the movie, The Wire, right? I think The Wire is a great show. The Wire was not created through sheer logic. It wasn't created through just rational analysis, which is a good thing, by the way. But all art is an expression of the irrational and pre-rational. If you're an artist out there listening to this, make use of this, right? If it's in essence that, we'll use that, right? Stop just doing the logical, oh, well, this could work here. Let these things kind of, remember the creative process we talked about earlier in this series? The wellspring of creativity, the sustenance of the life soul. There you go. That's pre-rational and irrational. Use that. Consequently, art resides for the most part within the magical and the mythical consciousness structures. Its roots probably lie much deeper, since it is the form of human expression closest to origin. I believe, and so does Gebser, that art is a spiritual utterance. Oh, by the way, real quick, what we're going to be noticing with the arts is we're going to see that tone, musical tone, colors in painting, and the spoken word in English are all no longer being treated like the rationalism, like the rationalists as merely means to an end, means to achieving an ego-driven, goal-driven, rational-driven end, and they become qualities themselves. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Tone, color, and the spoken word are all transforming, and that's why you're seeing such crazy stuff in the arts. Okay. Since art is predominantly at home in the non-rational regions, then, strictly speaking, any mental interpretation is inappropriate. Any interpretation of a work of art is inevitably hazardous, since what is expressed in tones, or assumes shape in buildings, or in outline or color, cannot be duplicated in language. How then can the medium of language elucidate works of music, painting, and architecture if they create non-linguistic expressions? Whatever is a speechless, genuine, and immediate expression cannot be translated into words. So we're getting some wisdom here, my friends. The sympathetic, analytic, or comparatoristic speaking about art offers us little indication, least of all about aperspectivity, although it is most clearly or most strongly mirrored and consequently most discernible in the arts, the seismographic expressions of man. Now, if you watch John David Ebert's, if you go take his class on Gebser with John David Ebert, what he's going to do, he's going to show you different art. Art is the way of bringing the change in consciousness structures to life. So what you're going to see is he's going to put this little picture up of these cave drawings, and there are going to be all these bears. And the bears are, they're certainly not realistic, but there's a certain degree of proportionality there, but it's not perspectively correct. All the bears are layered on top of each other in this sort of completely unorganized, disordered, unperspectival manner. Of course, then what happens? Then he's going to show you a picture of Las Meninas by Velázquez, and of course, everything is perspectively correct. The little girl on the back is much smaller than the man in the foreground. All of the shading is there, the perspective, the vanishing point, all that stuff. It's all there. And then, of course, he's going to show you a Picasso, and he's going to show you the aperspectival world, where, of course, Picasso said, oh, you took one perspective, drew some of it, and then took the time to take all these other perspectives and integrate them into a balanced whole where none is privileged over the other. And, of course, that's like a little microcosm of what we're doing with consciousness. Since the aperspectival is not only something new, but new to the structure of consciousness, and has concerns different from the previous consciousness structures, we need only to make these new concerns visible. Is the new music structurally new, is the new music structurally new music or merely novel? In our previous chapters, we have journeyed through the sciences, and on the basis of predominantly binding statements, have established certain predominant new states of affairs. They are primarily the new valuations of the time problem, the attempt to overcome rationalistic dualism, as well as the effort to perceive the world freely, universally, and to a certain extent from all sides, that is, irrationally and aperspectively. So that, of course, is the common three points that we've made. What's the point? The 3 points that are consistent through all the domains we talked about. Number 1, the time problem has come to the fore. 2, a supersession of dualism. 3, the perception of irrationality, or the aperspectival whole. It is only natural that we must find these same preoccupations, these incipient manifestations of the aperspectival in the arts, and above all in the new music. Of course, the emergence of these aperspectival manifestations cannot be merely incidental, but rather must be clearly a major concern for music itself as part of the shift in the structure of its values. It is in accord with the structural conditions of the new music that the aforementioned preoccupations are actually emphasized. So what he's saying is music, those 3 points I just mentioned, music has to embody these, or else this whole idea fails. Well, let's see what let's see what recent music attempts, according to Jean Gebser. I want you to take a guess what he says next. Number 1, to resolve in its own way the time problem, temporically. Number 1. Number 2, to escape dualism. And 3, to attain an irrational mode of expression. Pop quiz, little test here. I want you to guess what dualism he's talking about, the overcoming of dualism. Because I would have never gotten it. Now, I want to make this very clear. I'm not a musician. My girlfriend was a musician growing up, and, she, if I pulled her here, and she would probably have more to say. So, unfortunately, when it comes to the arts, I might not be quite as insightful as maybe some other domains, and even then, the effectivity of that is called into question. So, I do apologize if I'm not able to get into the nitty-gritty. I can do that with science and philosophy and all that stuff because you can just kind of look these things up, and it's all more or less mental. It's helpful to see things, but music, it's so immediate and it's so pre-rational that it's hard for me to really understand it. Okay. Number 1, the temporic efforts, those concerned with the problem of time, are to be heard in all the new works of new music. And where major contemporary composers and interpreters have occasion to discuss their own musical concerns, we find a hitherto unnoticed agreement in their preoccupation with the temporic. So the new musicians, they won't shut up about time. I think that's relevant to us. For Igor Stravinsky, musical creation is, quote, based primarily upon an exclusively musical experiencing of time, chronos, of which the musical work merely gives us the functional realization, end quote. Another of his statements, again, underscores the extraordinary significance that he accorded to the time phenomenon. Quote, music establishes an order between man and time, unquote. Moreover, in connection with his discussion of some of Stravinsky's works, Ernest Ansermet remarks that, quote, in music, Stravinsky sees the self-concretion of time, end quote. So let's talk about music and time real quick. I actually think music is one of those domains where understanding space-time is actually the easiest. Because think of your favorite song. Think of just some catchy, like Black Country New Road, right? The song Good Will Hunting. Dun 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 dun. Okay, it's not just the notes that are being played, but when the notes are being played. That helps confer the catchiness, if you will, or the quality of the song, right? So when a rock solo, a good guitar solo, sounds better after build-up, emphasis on the time. If you were to change the notes and you were to change the temporal unfolding or sequencing of the notes, you would have a completely different song. Just as the chemist changing the temporal order of what he adds to his little concoction here will blow everyone up because it's not space and time, it's space-time. So specifically musical forms of time would be rhythm, meter, tempo. That's a perfect... Remember Whiplash? What is J.K. Simmons scream at Neiman, at Miles Teller's character? What does Fletcher scream at Andrew when he's messing up? Does he say that's not my notes? No, he does not say that. He says that's not my tempo. Emphasis on the time. The time informs the spatial notes and movement. All right? So rhythm, meter, all these things, they help inform. Take your favorite Beatles song, and it's funny. I took my girlfriend for Valentine's Day to this kind of intimate quartet of violinists and cellists. I don't even know what the hell, but they were doing Bach and the Beatles. And I was listening to this, and I was thinking, man, the Beatles really did. And I'm not even the biggest fan of them, but they really understood melody very well. And I remember after the guy finished this song, I think it was Blackbird, he goes, I think Bach is the best at form, but I think Beatles is the best at melody. And I was like, yes, thank you. But the point is, change the melody to your favorite Beatles song, you have a completely new song. You have a completely new song. If you do Hey Jude or Yesterday in a way of like rap or spoken word, it's a completely new song. So space-time is most evident in music, in my opinion. But what kind of time is he speaking about? Although this question forces us into a terminological labyrinth, we must raise it. Stravinsky furnishes us with an answer. Quote, everyone knows that, listen to this, please listen to this, this is so base. Everyone knows that time passes at a rate which varies according to the inner disposition of the subject and to the events that come to affect his consciousness. We're both on the highway. We're both experiencing the same thing, a long drive to, Texas, okay? For whatever reason, actually, we're going to get into it, but time is moving very slowly for me, but it's moving very quickly for my brother, let's say. Well, the events are imprinting themselves or impressing themselves on our consciousness, and then based on our internal disposition, so based on the availability of the structures, based on your own past experiences, based on this disclosure of significance, i.e. the temporal aspects, based on your mood, based on whatever, it's moving differently. There you go. It's very interesting, very cool. You're seeing this not only in biology, which we know, not only in psychology, which we know, but also music now. So, pretty cool. Expectation, boredom, anguish, pleasure and pain, contemplation, all of these thus come to appear as different categories in the midst of which our life unfolds, and each of these determines a special psychological process, a particular tempo. Time moves slower when you're bored. When you were young and you were playing with your friends in the cul-de-sac, when I did this, I always used to say to my mom, 10 more minutes, I'm having such a good time, or that the time went by so quickly and I want more, that kind of thing. These variations in psychological time are perceptible only as they are related to the primary sensation, whether conscious or unconscious, of real-time ontological time. What gives the concept of musical time its special stamp is that this concept is born and develops as well outside of the categories of psychological time as it does simultaneously with them, unquote. From his subsequent discussion, this is Gebser, but particularly from his music, it is apparent that he favors ontological time, or ontological time as he understands it. Let's see. Applied to music, Adorno's estimation of time is as inadequate, as Ansermet's. Both remain confined in Bergsonian dualism. Adorno opposes lived time, psychological temporicity, to clock time. That's Adorno. So we have the dualism. Lived time, we have clock time. There is infinitely more temporal sequencing and unfoldings than this. There's rhythm, there's meter, there's tempo, there's repetition, there's biological time, there's all this stuff, right? Scientific time with the weird perspective changes. Let's see. Adorno opposed live time to clock time, yet music is concerned with more than these two temporal forms, and Ansermet remains entrapped by them. So there you go. Quote, we have only two possibilities of mastering time. This is Ansermet. In ourselves as psychic and qualitative time, this is musical time or tempo, and outside of ourselves, in the universe where time becomes automatic, measured by a clock or a metronome. So, of course, we have time as an extensity, that is rational time, and time as an intensity, that is immeasurable qualitative time. This is the time of Stravinsky, the former, that is. Its character of necessity explains Stravinsky's claims regarding tempo. Yet we must make clear that his understanding of time differs from our own, unquote. It is obvious that the time forms defined by Stravinsky, as well as by Adorno and Ansermet, are contradictory. We should like to contrast them with the definition advanced by Hermann Scherin, since his temporal forms correspond to a great extent with our mythical and mental. Scherin contrasts the metrum, the capacity of order that can resist time, with the rhythm, a life process lost in time. In addition to the time forms of the rhythmic natural universal, and also psychic, and the measured metric automatic, there is also magic time, i.e. timelessness. So, of course, we have even more vistas of time. We have the mental time, and then we have the 2D polar time. This is its own form of temporal unfolding. We know this, right? It's just a different one. Then, of course, we have magical timelessness. So these guys are wrong when they're just trying to do the dualism thing. No, you are missing the whole. Listen, this is pretty cool. It is found in the primordial music that significantly was discovered only during the last decade. Examples are the songs from the Canary Islands, as well as several from the Andes that have become known through the Indian songstress Yima Sumac. That's YMA. So he's going to talk about timeless, magical consciousness structure music, which is pretty cool. They are distinguishable in their pure form in that they are manifestations without beginning and end. Repeat that. Tell me what structure this sounds like. They are distinguishable in their pure form in that they are manifestations without beginning and end. That is without time. That is magical timelessness. So the songs themselves embody the aspects of the structure that gave rise to them. Pretty cool. A chance intrusion of the voice and a chance ending, a sleep that has, as it were, become sound. The new music, and everything points to this, is in a position to abolish previous time forms. In its mode of expression, it seems to approach timeless music, although it overdetermines toward time freedom. Thus, time freedom, again, in this instance, means consciously surpassed timelessness. Based. That is us. We have consciously surpassed timelessness and all the other forms of time, insofar as we are not a slave to them. We have become the master, and they can become our slave. If you insist on using the master-slave imagery. Okay. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Regardless of the terminology with which one attempts to express musical facts of temporic character, one consideration is decisive. It is not the terminological superstructure above the new musical events, not a mere superimposition that is important, but the musical event itself and the new mode of expression sounding in it. In other words, the fact that Stravinsky, Ansermet, Adorno, and Scherin use different terminologies, for example, to discuss the concept of time is less important than the fact that they and others all investigate the problem of time. So don't get lost in semantic games. No one's saying semantics aren't important. I know you philosopher guys, but they're not everything. The same is true of Ernest Krenek, who indicates in his Vienna Lectures of 1937 various parallels between the new physics and the new music. These parallels are related to instability. Instability. Interesting. Non-visuality. Does that not sound like the physics? Does that not sound like the transparent or dark matter that we can now perceive, even though it's not really visualizable? And the non-visualizable aspects of the irrational perspectival manifestations like the quantum of action or biological time? Yes, it does to me. And four-dimensionality, as well as to the understanding of time as such. In addition, Krenek not only speaks repeatedly of the particular importance and value that must be attributed to the relationship of music to time, but also shows that, quote, the essential trait of the new music is the reassessment of the problem of form. That is, how the relationships of the piece of music to time are realized in the orderings which regulate the course of its elements. So the form would be the spatial systems, the musical theory, the spatial systems, this note, this note, this note. Right. So what he's saying is the form is undergoing a transformation. Why would the form undergo a transformation? Is it almost as if the static spatial systems have been set into motion, which has in turn changed them? As if every other domain that we've talked about in this series, at least in the second part of this book, that would be my guess. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. And here lies the difference between primordial and new music. In the Canary Island and Indian songs, that's the primordial, that's the magic structure, we find a primordial sadness and resignation far from waking consciousness, which corresponds to the formed insight into the fragmentary and thus permits the fullness of the whole to be transparent. So in taking the rational accounting of what, even or maybe irrational or rational understanding of this new kind of music, this former primordial music, what it's doing is it's making clear the differences between the mental structure and the magic structure. And in turn, what that does is, of course, waken integral consciousness. Therein is reflected not only theoretically, but audibly the structural change which has erupted through the new valuation of time and music. Now, here's the problem, of course, and this is kind of obvious, and Gebser already kind of touched on this to an extent. But we're kind of just taking his word for this, because it's not like he can just, especially not back in the 50s or whenever this was released, you can't put the song in the book and just press down on the page and it'll start playing. So this is kind of like that disclaimer I made. You know, I can only take you so far on this one. I won't pretend to be. I would love to listen to these Canary Island and Old Indian songs, but realistically, I don't have any way of getting them. So we're just kind of going with what he says. But if you disagree, you know, you're more than entitled to leave a comment. Okay. Let's see. Paul Hindemith has also given an account of this in his introductory lecture at the University of Zurich, 1951. He developed, quote, new theoretical and psychological views in music concerning space and time, unquote, which he entitled, quote, musical inspiration, thus broaching the question of creativity. We talked about that. That such an acutely conscious confrontation with time is taking place via such diverse proponents of the new music as Hindemith, Krennic, Schoenberg, and Stravinsky shows that this question must play a significant part in their new music. So, pretty self-explanatory on that one. Beautifully said by Gebser. Let's see. Ansemet remarks that, quote, it is precisely these peculiarities of his art that lead Stravinsky to two discoveries which are of general significance and may be considered the most significant in contemporary music, unquote. These two discoveries, according to E. Ansemet, are polymetrics and polytonality, which lead us directly to our second point, namely the supersession of dualism in the new music. All right, here's the moment of the test moment. I asked you, what is the dualism that we are trying to supersede in the new music? The answer is, of course, major and minor tone. And if you've watched the movie Tar, which I haven't, but I've watched that like 7, 8, 9 minute scene where that Cate Blanchett tells off that woke student. She even mentions this. Go watch that scene in Tar. Just look up Tar. I'm not trying to make a political point. I'm really not. But if you just turn in like Tar woke scene or whatever, I'm sure it'll come up. It's just Cate Blanchett talking to a student about Bach and about music. I'm really not trying to make a political point here. But she mentions in that scene atonality and how it's a new form of thing. And she's kind of giving this Gebser stuff. It's very interesting to hear musicians talk about that in like contemporary movies. They're like, hey, that's what Gebser's talking about. Okay, so now we're on to point number 2. We definitely won't finish this whole section today. But I'll try to get the rest of it within the next few days. Our deliberations have repeatedly made it possible to observe that wherever time erupts in a previous system or realm of expression, the systems or realms were disrupted. Perfect microcosm of what's happening more broadly. Let me repeat that. Our deliberations have repeatedly made it possible to observe that wherever time erupts in a previous system or realm of expression, the systems or realms were disrupted. That is precisely what is happening on the main, on the broad. All of our economics, all the domains we touched about, they've all been set into motion, and they've all disrupted these systems. I think, honestly, the worst of it is in philosophy. I think philosophy really struggled to adapt to this, and I think if you bet the house on these systems being static, and then they're suddenly set into motion, you're going to have a problem. The same process can be consistently demonstrated in music. Willem Furtwängler, I wonder if that's an Italian guy, identifies this fact as follows, quote, since the turn of the century, there has been a genuine and deeply intruding transformation in the tone material underlying music, and it was Arnold Schoenberg who gave the decisive impulse to the movement within music to overcome the previously unlimited sovereignty of the major-minor tonal system. So that's the main supersession of dualism, rather than either or maybe organic or inorganic with biology or space and time and physics, or rational or irrational in economics, our economic actors, rational or irrational. This one is major-minor tone. The group associated with Schoenberg, whose following includes an increasing number of modern musicians throughout the world, proclaims that this system, having served as a foundation for the great European evolution of music since the Renaissance and Baroque, has become superannuated. Atonal music, as it has been called since then, came into being. Hold on, let me see. Okay, so I wrote in my notes here, tonality is to music what perspectivity is to art. We've talked about the importance of perspectivity to art and rationality, so think about that. We wish to cite here a few additional remarks of Furtwängler, our favorite Italian, although he employs a Spenglerian terminology symptomatic of Spengler's failure in the face of new tasks. There's a very interesting critique of Spengler coming here. Spengler understood the third dimension, which he applied to painting. To painting yielded the possibility of perspective as a temporal depth dimension. This is the fundamental difference between Spengler's model of history or philosophy of history and Gebser's. Gebser says the third dimension was space. Spengler says the third dimension was time. This right here is the fundamental difference between Gebser and Spengler. As temporal depth dimension. This was the decisive failure of his theory of history as a result of his predominantly Faustian, biologically stressed pre-decision. It's ironic that he calls Spengler Faustian because that's what Spengler calls Western civilization. Furtwängler's prejudgment is pathos-ridden and emotional, deriving from the influence exerted over him by Spengler's and Klages's biologism and vitalism. It culminates in his rejection of the new music as, quote, biologically inferior, intellectualistic, anti-Ptolemaic, and antagonistic to the ego. Okay, so let's slow down here for a second. First of all, why does Gebser assign an emphasis of the magic structure to Spengler? Where does that come from? That, to me, seems obvious, that Spengler conceives of nations not as dead, static, inert matter, but as living, organic processes. Obviously not the literally same as biological processes, but there are irrational similarities, and I think that's one of the big points. It's he overemphasizes the biological aspects, Spengler does. And you can tell he does because, well, he overemphasizes the magic structure and the mental structure because he says, yes, this is a living organism just like anything else, but also it's fated. It's determined mentally to be fated. Now, of course, integral structure would say, no, my friend. There's no mental. You've overstretched the mental determination. That's ridiculous, but very interesting. So, of course, when he says, culminates in his rejection of the new music and Klages. God, I can't pronounce that guy's name. It culminates in his rejection of the new music as biologically inferior, intellectualistic. God damn, you guys are actually getting like you guys are watching the lectures of a moron. I can't even read. Intellectualistic. Excuse me. God, why don't I just bring my 9-month-old in and she can give you guys lectures? My God. Intellectualistic, anti-Ptolemaic, and antagonistic to the ego. So obviously he's having a little rationalist temper tantrum there. Okay, if we make careful allowances for Spengler's false terminology, Furtwängler's statements are nonetheless valid. Music experiences its realization in the dimension of time. The tonal cadence lends to the musical event, which until the Renaissance proceeded from one tone to another on one level, on one plane, perspectively, the possibility of superordinate, recapitulate interconnections and hence a depth articulation previously unknown. It is not inappropriate to speak here in Spengler's terms, third dimension as revealing time and not merely space, and posit a parallelism between tonality and the discovery of perspective. Tonality relates to the dimension of time, wherein music has its realization as space to the pictorial arts as the third... God damn, I need to restart that, sorry. And posit a parallelism between tonality and the discovery of perspective. Tonality relates to the dimension of time, wherein music has its realization, as space to the pictorial arts as the third dimension, the dimension of depth. Both tonality and perspective owe their discovery to the same life impulse. So again, if you extract the terminological confusion, what he's saying more or less is that, like I said, tonality is to music what perspectivity is to art and painting. It's just fundamental. Now, of course, Spengler makes the mistake of assuming time is 3D. Now, Gebser understands, yeah, tonality is 3D, and so is, like I said, so is perspective. But once you get past that, it's interesting to understand. I apologize for slurring over my words, and I don't know what's going on. The parallelism between tonality and perspective, as shown by Furtwängler, is valid despite Spengler's false definition of the third dimension. The fallaciousness is already evident in Furtwängler's first statement, in which the quote-unquote dimension of time is seen as an abstraction. But abstraction cannot contain lived experience. Primordial music is lived experience realized in timelessness and not in a temporal dimension. In contrast, the new music reveals itself in the new amention of time, that is, achronically. Or, more accurately, as a consequence of its temporic attempts, it is on the way toward the discovery of achronic time freedom expression. God damn. So essentially what he's saying is the new music is fundamentally different from the Magic Structures music, because like he described, that's timeless. Okay, that's nice, but time freedom encompasses timelessness and everything else. So the new music is more focused on time freedom rather than just timelessness. Kind of like our fourth dimension discussion. You don't want to conflate these because then you just get mixed up. I think we'll stop there. I apologize toward the end. It seems like I lost a little steam. I'm not entirely sure why. It's not like I'm hungry or anything, but I love you guys. Hopefully this was a little illuminating. I'm trying my best with music. I'm not an expert when it comes to music. So I love you guys. What else is new? I'll try my best to finish out this section within the next 3-4 days. But I can't make any promises because I got a little one running around and I got to prioritize her first. You guys are the best. I love you, and I love doing this series with you. We're almost done. It's going to hurt me when we're done, but we're almost there. And you guys are the best. I love you guys.